Greeting brothers and sisters, we recently visited Prague and had such a fantastic time over there. Whenever we visit Prague, we enjoy ourselves because the medieval city of Prague is so beautiful, and the churches and the bridges and the castles and the clock towers and the walking streets really make the city lively, and you really enjoy yourselves. It's like walking into history. It's like walking into a wonderland, and even the food was so beautiful. It was so good. It was so delicious. Yet on this trip, I learned something about the Czech people that really saddened my heart, and I would call it the tragedy of Prague, or I would call it the tragedy of the Czech people. And what is this tragedy? The tragedy is that more than 80% of the Czech people are indifferent to God. Not necessarily that they are atheists, but they have no concept or they have no need of God in their lives. How did it come to be that such a big population of that country is indifferent to God, and they do not even know what they are missing by not having a living relationship with God? It all starts in the history, and to understand how this happened, we have to understand a little bit about the history of the Czech Republic. We want to start our history in the 14th century when Charles IV was reigning, and he is the one who ushered in the golden age. He is the one who put Prague on the map. He built the Charles Bridge, which was one of the first stone bridges to be built in Europe, thus bringing a lot of people to Prague. Thus maybe tourism has been happening in Prague since the 14th century. He also built the Charles University, which was one of the first universities in Europe and is in existence till today, and is considered to be one of the finest universities in Europe. I myself was considering to study in that university. He also built so many castles, and he also built so many churches, including the St. Peter's Cathedral, which was modeled after Notre Dame of Paris, but I consider it to be even more beautiful. Now this king, as all other kings, was a Holy Roman king. He was a Catholic king, and as in that time all the people were Catholics, but by the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century, there was a Catholic priest who was influenced by the teachings of John Wycliffe. He had issues with many of the teachings, especially with the teaching of indulgences, which he said if you've sinned or did something wrong, you can pay the church and you can go to heaven. Now this person, he started the Reformation for the Czech people or the Bohemian people 100 years before Martin Luther. This did not go well with the Catholic Church, and they invited him to the Council of Constance to defend himself and to recant, which he did not. Thus he was burned alive, and they thought that was the end of it. But he had so many followers who were called the Hussites, and they started something strange and unique to Prague, which is called the defenestration of Prague, and they were two defenestrations of Prague. Now what is this fancy term defenestration? It simply means pushing somebody out of a window, and after Jan Hus was burned alive, his followers threw out some Catholics from the windows, and it started the Hussite Wars. But that did not end well with the Catholic Church. They were defeated 5 times, and thus they were given the permission to worship as they were. They were given the liberty to worship as they want, which was one of the first at that time in Europe. And as they were given this freedom, the Protestant church started to grow. But 100 years after that, the Habsburg, they invaded or they took over the region of Bohemia, and the king at that time, the King Ferdinand, he said he was a Catholic king, and he said he doesn't like all this liberty, and he's going to go back on the treaty, and he stopped the constructions of 2 of the Protestant churches, and he said no more Protestantism, and he said the people have to revert back to the Catholic Church. Now this ushered in the second defenestration, and they threw out, the Protestants threw out 2 of the Catholic priests and 1 secretary, which started the 30-year war. And is the 30-year war engulfed almost all of Europe and is considered to be one of the bloodiest in history, and a lot of people died because of that. Now, brothers and sisters, what do we learn from this? What do we study from this? We learn that religious intolerance does much more harm than good. What was the end result of the Hussite Wars? What was the end result of the 30 Years' Wars? Both sides lost. Yes, the Protestant won the Hussite Wars, but they became so weak that the neighboring Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, came and ruled over them, invaded them, and they were Catholics. They were still given the freedom to worship until 100 years later, when one of the kings of the Habsburg Empire by the name of Ferdinand said, I don't like all this religious freedom. He stopped the construction of the two of the Protestant churches. He also was forcing the people to revert back to Catholicism, which ended up in the defenestration or throwing out of two of the Catholic priest and a secretary out of the window of the castle, and they survived, starting the 30-year war. What was the end result of the 30-year war? Both sides, they lost. Protestants lost the war, but the Holy Roman Empire, by the end of that war and the Napoleonic Wars, was dissolved. The Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, continued to rule until the end of the First World War, when they also lost. And thus, Czechs with the Slovaks, their brothers, they made an independent country under Tomáš Masaryk, which started the industrial age, thus the prosperity of Czechoslovakia. But that was short-lived, as by the Second World War, Nazis came, they ruled over them, then they were independent for a little while more, and then the Russians came, the communists came, and they ruled over them. And what was the effect of communism? It did so much harm on the people. They were not allowed to worship, they were not allowed to believe in God, there was no churches and there was no Bibles. And this all this history has so much bad effect on the Czech people. Although the country is prospering, although there is a lot of tourism, although financially they are doing well, yet all these wars, all these religious wars, all these people dying, all this imposing of the Catholic Church of their religion on the people, the Czech people say, we don't want to be imposed. Brothers and sisters, we have to share the gospel in love, not by imposing. What was the end result? All this history, all this war, all this imposing, all the people dying, made the people go away from the idea, and especially communism, idea of God. They didn't like it. They didn't like religion. I mean, it's not God's fault. It is the people, how they impose, how they practice their religion, how they practice their spirituality. And the end result is, although the nation is progressing, although the nation is going ahead financially, they do not believe in God. Most of them, at least. And in the 90s, people were reverting to Buddhism, because Dalai Lama was visiting the Czech Republic. And you see, the people who do not know their basics, people who do not know their roots, people who do not know the Bible, what are they going to do? They are going to go astray. They are going to go away from God. Brothers and sisters, my heart really hurts and beats for the Czech people. Although they are progressing and they might gain the whole world, but what is the use if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? I'm not saying the souls of the Czech people are lost, but I am saying we need to pray for them so that they can find their way back to God. And at least most of them, we can't save everybody. Not everybody is going to believe. But I believe the Czech people are looking, they are searching. So if you get an opportunity to go and visit Prague, it is so beautiful. I really enjoyed walking on the Charles Bridge, visiting the castle, visiting the St. Vitus Cathedral, studying about the astronomical clock, which was really fantastic. The old town square is really beautiful. I had some very nice meals over there. I also walked around a neighborhood called the Visegrad, which is nearby in Prague. So there's a lot of nice places to walk along the river, go visit the city, but also pray for the city. God bless you, and I hope I will bring you some more adventures from my travels and share them with you. I will see you in the next video.